Hey everybody, it's Jamie here, the triathlon nutrition coach. I hope you're doing well. And today I'm going to talk about 10 things that you can do as a triathlete to lose 10 kilos. Very clever of me there, isn't it? Play on words and all that, if that's what it even is. But anyway, we're going to look at how we lose those 10 kilos, 10 different ways, and 10 things that you need to do. And all of this is designed around losing that weight, but without sacrificing performance and in fact doing the opposite, about improving it. So this is inspired partly by a reel I did on Instagram, which is probably my most successful one I've ever done in terms of like reach and views and all that kind of business. So I guess what it tells me is that hopefully it's something that people are interested in and going to get value from. So let me start. An awful lot of triathletes, and especially when you're talking longer distance like 70.3 and Ironman, they go into it thinking that weight is just going to literally fall off you, but very often it doesn't. For some people it does, and to be honest, those people, they're usually either younger, like in their 20s, they're maybe genetically like slightly superior, if that's the way of putting it, depending on what you think of as superior and inferior. But for most people, as they start to increase training, especially if you're a little bit older, your appetite goes up, you justify being able to eat more, you overfuel certain sessions, and very often body weight can go up. So of course then that can get frustrating. You think, right, I need to try and find ways to drop body fat, body weight. But then the worry is, well, what if it affects my performance? What if it makes me slower? What if I lose power? What if I can't do all the sessions that I've got on Training Peaks this week? So there's this kind of anxiety, and it's kind of you've got like a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you're concerned that you're putting on weight, you're not feeling like an athlete, looking like an athlete, performing like an athlete, and on the other hand, you're worrying about fueling sessions, recovering from sessions, and losing power. So I want to make this very clear. Like the points that I'm going to come up with here are not about doing anything crazy. I wouldn't even describe it as dieting. Really what it's about is looking at improving your body composition, so the sort of ratio of fat and muscle, in order to enhance your performance. And obviously triathlon is part of that, but it's also about feeling good day to day, looking good, having good confidence, and all of those things. Okay, so we'll start here with the first point, which is basically looking at having consistency. Now this is boring, but it's so important. Consistency over heroics. So it's very easy when you are motivated, driven, want to make a change, throw in like a massive week, big volume, low calories. Maybe you've seen people do some slightly crazy stuff on the internet, and you think, oh, that appeals to you. And this is another problem that as triathletes, anybody who's considering doing an Ironman or 70.3, automatically you're a slightly different person. You might be attracted to the extreme. And as such, when you see extreme ideas, you're like, yeah, I like that. But of course, what that means is that it's potentially very unsustainable. But when you've seen, I don't know, a 21-year-old influencer or someone that you might respect or someone who looks really good or performs really well, suggesting that this extreme approach is good, then it can seem like, worth a go. But in my experience, and I've got a reasonable amount of it, I've been around the sport for 25 years, that consistency over heroics every single time. You want to look at doing things which are repeatable, not extreme. And your body composition will always respond more to being able to recover and having like a progressive and stable stimulus rather than these crazy big weeks. So you can't. It's as simple as being calm and repeatable. So along the similar lines, I suppose what I was talking about there is really about training, like not being like crazy in terms of like, right, I'm going out there, going to do a huge training load. So secondly then, in line with that, it's about taking a similar approach to kind of your calories. So again, you want to lose weight, you want to improve body composition. The temptation is to radically cut calories. And we have to understand that these desires to do things radically are driven by emotion very often. You'll come back from holiday and see yourself in the mirror, or put a pair of trousers on, or see a picture at a race and think, my God, I need to lose some weight and I need to do something extreme. This is part of people's undoing. So no, we don't want to go extreme. So we don't want to radically cut calories. We need to create a slight deficit, we all know that. But it's important to eat enough so that you can train well, recover well, adapt well, and have relatively stable energy. Because when you diet too aggressively, the quality of your training will drop. Your mood day to day will become affected. Your sleep will suffer, and you increase the chance of binging, especially at weekends. So what we want to do is create a small deficit, not a big one. Because the more extreme that deficit is as well, it's going to potentially risk muscle loss. And then with that risk of muscle loss comes the risk of losing power. So there's no point in being a lighter version of your current self if you're weaker and slower. That's not a win. That's a problem. So in line with that, the next thing that we need to really focus on is making sure that our protein is consistent. It's a thing that a lot of people struggle with, especially in endurance sport, because we're focused too heavily, or very often too heavily, on carbohydrate. And we need that, don't get me wrong, but oftentimes we have too much. So one really good way to think about getting enough protein in is to make sure that you're getting like a palm-sized serving. So you think about the palm of your hand, chicken breast, a couple of scrambled eggs. It gets a little bit more difficult when you're talking about things like Greek yogurt, but you could scoop your hand in there theoretically. Some salmon, stuff like that. A palm size of protein every single time you eat. So what that means is obviously your breakfast, lunch and dinner, but also any snacks you eat. The only time I would say that isn't relevant is if obviously you're out on like a long ride or something like that. But a palm size of protein every time you eat will mean that you're getting a very decent amount. And of course, why is that important? Well, it helps maintain our muscle mass, it helps support recovery, but also it really helps regulate and control our appetite. So the goal here really is like protecting all of the things which are allowing us to kind of perform well, and specifically our muscle. Muscle is so good for us for longevity, etc., etc. And I'm going to come on to that a little bit more in a second. So, protein with every meal. Next point, lifting weights. So I know it's hard when you've got a full training schedule to fit in strength training, and very often that's one of the first things that goes. But alongside making sure you've got enough protein, weight training is going to obviously help you maintain rather than build muscle. Now you can structure your season in a way that you can build a bit of muscle, and I try and do this with my own training. Very often, like sort of October to January, I'll be in the gym and maybe get 4 or 5 gym sessions in a week, with the aim of kind of maybe building a very slight bit of muscle to protect me for the rest of the year. That's a different story. But essentially what we're talking about here is making sure that you've got progressive. So this means like creating enough stimulus through the training that you're doing, which means essentially adding weight or adding reps each week, and having at least 2 strength sessions a week, but ideally 3. And it's important to understand or explain that this isn't instead of doing your triathlon training. It's something that you want to do alongside it. Again, this is more important as we get older, and more important probably for women. So the purpose here is to maintain muscle, which is going to help us metabolically, but it's also going to protect us from injury. And it also means that we keep kind of neuromuscular strength. So by that, what I mean is like your body kind of fires better. Like you can jump higher. You can, if you're running and you need to take some drastic action because a cat pulls out in front of you or something, you can shift to the side and stuff like that. It's really important. So if you're losing body weight without strength training and without having protein in your diet, you've got a really significant risk of losing muscle. And as we do that, we might be even still reducing size, but essentially we're losing fat and muscle, and what we want to do is just lose fat. Okay, so the next point is making sure that we've got sufficient vegetables in the diet. A lot of people struggle with this, but it's important to understand that vegetables help with health. We know that, and health is the foundation of performance. So we need to really focus not just on eating and consuming things that are helping us get through sessions, but actually improving and enhancing our health. And then that'll allow us to perform better. So we think about having a very decent serving of veg at each meal. So for me, I'll give you a quick example. For breakfast, I'll have one of two options, but I'll just run through one. I might have a couple of eggs, and then I'll have some mushrooms and spinach. For lunch, I'll also have an apple. So I'd class vegetables and fruit to some extent in a similar category, because obviously they're full of micronutrients. But vegetables more so, and obviously they come with less sugar. So yeah, mushrooms, spinach, apple for breakfast. Lunch, it will be based around a salad, which will be spinach, peppers, maybe a bit of grated carrot. And then I'll usually have raspberries for a bit of dessert with a bit of jelly. Mid-afternoon, I'll have a snack usually of yogurt, Greek yogurt. There's not usually any veggies in that. But then with dinner, very often I'll have 3 or 4 servings. Kale, broccoli, green beans, corn, asparagus, leek, all of these things. I really like them. I didn't used to, but I've found ways of making them tasty that I enjoy, and it's really important. So vegetables aren't going to do anything to burn fat, but they do fill us up as well. They add satiety, and it goes beyond that, of course. Micronutrients in the diet support recovery. They help with gut health, all of which will then lead to health improving. And as I said previously, that's the foundation of good performance. Okay, so next up, we don't want to overly restrict during the week so that we end up having a massive binge at the weekend. So very common. People start the week on a Monday and are like, right, I need to sort this out, slash calories, go out too hard, can hang on, get to the weekend. Very often the weekend's also the time we train the most, long rides, etc. So again, that justifies eating more. And of course you do need to consume more when you're training more, but within reason. So what we don't want to do is over-restrict in the week to then drive this kind of rebound at the weekend. So for me, what really helps with that is like matching the nutrition that you have to the actual training that you're doing. So you look at, I look at people's training plans all the time, obviously, and I'll look at it and say, right, okay, on a Monday you need, 2,000 calories. On a Saturday you need 3,000. On a Wednesday you need 2,500, whatever it might be. And we're matching the calories to the training that they're doing. But what we don't want to do is match those calories by adding in 6 pints and a pizza at the weekend. It's a matter of adding good quality calories in to support the training that you're doing. So I think when you've got strategy there around how you set calories for the training that you're doing, that's one way to avoid the weekend binge, because you've actually got it set out in advance. In the same way you have your training set out in advance, you've got your calories and your macros mapped out in advance. You know what you need to work towards. Okay, so next, daily steps. So we all have heard of the 10,000 steps and all that business. It's important to explain that 10,000 steps for me doesn't include running steps. So we want to be active outside of training at a minimal level. Now, that will be different for different people. For some people, 10,000 is the right place. For some people, it might be 7. But we want to have a minimum daily step target that we work towards. That is so critical to good body composition, because very often when we train in reasonable volumes, what happens is we're doing a lot of formal training, but then actually we reduce the amount of daily movement that we have because we're so bloody tired, basically. So we're trying to conserve energy for the all day so we can use it in the training session. I think, certainly when you're looking at body composition, having light movement, and walking is light movement. We're not talking about walking up, going on a hill walk here. We're talking about hitting a minimal daily step target. It matters massively because it increases like your output, your caloric burn, without increasing stress. And this is what we're trying to do. If you go for a run, there'll be a minimal level of stress depending on the intensity. If you go for a walk, a light walk, you're not increasing stress. In fact, it might even help with recovery whilst burning a few extra calories. Okay, so then sleep. Sleep matters hugely. For me, I feel like I need 8 hours sleep. Some people get by on 6, but I don't think you can get away with less than that. Not when you're training hard. Lack of sleep will affect our hunger. Hormonally, it will affect our hunger. It affects our recovery. It affects our training quality. It enhances the chance of us making bad choices with regard to food. We've all been there where you're knackered, you feel crap. So what do? Like, you don't usually go and eat a chicken breast and a portion of rice. You eat something which instantly makes you feel better, which is usually highly processed crap. And when you're underslept, you're more likely to make like reactive decisions. Your discipline, your resolve will be less. So this is one of the main reasons why it's so important to body composition. And the next and final point is really about being ruthlessly consistent. It's so easy, and especially in this day and age, to set out on a course, decide you're going to follow a certain nutrition plan or whatever, and then get distracted because somebody else says something's better. Somebody on the internet, maybe with a massive following, maybe with 6-pack abs, maybe an amazing athlete, and it's easy for your head to get turned by that and be like, oh, actually they're doing that works, should I do this? And it's a question I get all the time. Should I do this? Should I have creatine? Should I fast? Would it be better to not have breakfast? Would it be better to have breakfast? Like, honest to God, there is no perfect way. There's a right way for you. So what has to happen is you find the way for you and then you stick to it. And then if it doesn't work, you make small changes, not big ones. We don't want to be chasing novelty or extremes. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is create a small caloric deficit with a focus on keeping protein up, adding in some strength training, fueling for performance, having some daily movement via steps, focusing on sleep, and repeating that process for days, weeks, and months. And that is where the magic happens. It isn't new, it isn't sexy, it isn't shiny. If I make a video on that or the podcast on that, it's not going to get millions of listens because it doesn't grab attention. But I've been doing this as a coach, for 12 years online. I was doing it before that face to face. So, I know what works. I know what works for me. I know what works. I've worked with in excess of 1,000 triathletes. I know what works for people. So it's important to understand here that when you're making these changes to body composition, the goal might be to weigh a little bit less, but really the goal is to carry less fat without sacrificing muscle. When you get that right, performance skyrockets, it goes up. What we don't want to be doing is losing weight from fat and muscle. We just want to be losing the fat and minimizing muscle loss. So I hope that helps. I always end the podcast by saying, if you've got any questions, if you're trying to improve your body composition and you're struggling, feel free to drop me a message. If you're not already, then follow me on Instagram, Triathlon Nutrition Coach, Facebook, Triathlon Nutrition Coach. Ping me a message there anytime and I'll be happy to help. And I hope that helps, and have a good rest of your day.